The committee will now move to our next witness, Mr Peter Murphy. Welcome, Mr Murphy, representing Australian supporters of democracy in Iran. We're grateful for your time. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity which you appear today?
My name is Peter Murphy and I'm here as a Co-Secretary of Australian supporters of democracy in Iran.
Thank you. And I'll now invite you to make a short opening statement and then committee members will ask you questions.
Thank you, Chair. So, Australian supporters of democracy in Iran was formed in 2004. It's not a parliamentary Friends of Democratic Iran, but its membership is drawn from federal and state MPs. That's a high priority for us. And it also includes members from trade unions, churches and anti-war and human rights groups. Our objective is to support democracy in Iran, as our name says, and in particular the principles of the National Council of Resistance of Iran and its 10-point plan for a transition to democracy. We support peace, stability and freedom in Iran and particularly support the rights of women against fundamentalism and discrimination. So going to the topic in specifics, it's very, very clear that in Iran the state controls the mainstream media and also has invested heavily in cyber warfare, cyber surveillance and creating its own messaging apps to enable it to monitor dissident opinions and communicate its own quote-unquote information. People in Iran really have to use social media themselves to get alternative news, some more reliable news, and they also have to access the internet through virtual private networks to sidestep the regime's control. It's important. Social media is important for the people, as I said, for informing each other about what they're doing, for recording violations of their rights by the state, and also to help organise and coordinate the protest movement, which is very, very large in these last months. But it's been going on for a long, long time. So because of this framework, it's absolutely clear that the Iranian state would view Iranians in Australia as part of its target, and they use surveillance through the internet on Australian Iranians as well. And you have heard, and there's been reports in the media of cyber surveillance on people in Australia, leading to the detention or interrogation of relatives of these people inside Iran, threats and intimidation, mainly directed to people in Australia stopping their activity, showing some support for the uprising underway in Iran. Just a few more points. So we really welcome the fact that the Foreign Minister took decisive action to sanction individuals and entities in Iran in her announcements on December 10 last year, February 1 and March 20 this year. But these actions are not directly related to this media and internet issue we're discussing today. I think this whole area of coping with abuse in the cyberspace is not well developed in Australia. However, we know that this is a widespread abuse going on. So according to the Australian Human Rights Commission, social media postings can be against the law if they discriminate against, harass, bully or racially vilify a person. And I don't really have to say, inciting to violence or threatening to kill people is illegal, and it's not simply a civil offence. But given that, I think abuse is widespread in social media in Australia in general. Clearly, it's a bit of an open slather for the Iranian government's agencies to abuse. So in our recommendations, we were asking for the Australian Cyber Security Centre to have a unit capable of directly monitoring the internet and social media traffic from Iran to Australia, identify Iranian government agencies operating social media in Australia, receive complaints from Australian citizens and residents of cyber abuse relating to Iran, and report cases of illegal cyber activity to police and prosecuting agencies. We've got a recommendation about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. I know there's been a lot of intense debate in the government and in the parliament about what action to take about IRGC activity, but we strongly urge wherever, at least this much, wherever the IRGC is identified as a player in abuse of people in Australia using the cyberspace, that appropriate action be taken against those people. So that's it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Murphy. We're grateful for your appearance before the committee today, and we are hearing from a number of diaspora community representatives because the perspective of diaspora communities is very important to the committee. They are often the first target of attempts of foreign interference because some foreign governments, the Iranian government included, regard people who are of Iranian ancestry or descent, no matter where they are in the world, as effectively property of the regime and have obligations towards the regime, no matter where they live or what their citizenship is. As you say, there's been some very concerning public reporting about harassment of both Iranian Australians and also their family members back home directly relating to their activism in Australia, which is deeply disturbing given we're a country, a liberal democracy that values free speech and the right to protest, and it is totally unacceptable. The Minister for Home Affairs has publicly disclosed one of the interference attempts, which was a physical in-person attempt to intimidate Iranian diaspora community members. So we can pretty safely bet that if it's happening physically onshore in Australia, that there's a very strong online component of it too. Can you talk a little bit about what the experience of Iranian Australians have been in recent months, particularly those who've been protesting against the regime? What have they experienced online? What is their sense of what is happening to them?
Yes, there's two particular families that I know, one in Melbourne and one in Sydney. So I think the Hosseini family is maybe come to your attention already. So there was a very, very disturbing series of events happened there in that their relatives in Iran were taken into detention, interrogated and threatened. And then this was conveyed to Nosrat Hosseini and her relatives in Melbourne. And Nosrat in the end decided to go public about it and say that she would not comply and she would continue. But actually for a little while, a couple of months, they did stop all their activity while they, I guess, had to figure out just what was involved in this situation. So I really admire them for resolving it in the way they did and bringing it to light. Very recently now, just in the last week, this family I know in Sydney called Akbari become subject to death threats using the internet by people, Iranians in Australia, who are clearly, I think, agents, probably IRGC agents. So in this case, their son-in-law living in London was part of a 3-member rap group who were performers, but the group split up just a couple of weeks ago, and then a story emerged in Iran, in the Iranian media with the Iranian government, that the reason that they'd split up was because 2 of the members had discovered that the family of this other person's wife were terrorists as members of PMOI or MEK. And then their images turned up on tweets in Australia alongside images of PMOI people who were killed in Iran in the 1980s. And the message was, we will find you and we will kill you. So these are images of bodies run over by tanks or burnt bodies. So it was very, very graphic, and they fully understand what's being said to them. So this is happening right now. And again, I think that family in Sydney, the Akbaris, are very resolute in continuing their activity, which is mostly doing information tables for the public outside the Sydney Town Hall or in Hyde Park to ask people to support the uprising in Iran. So, very, very basic, straightforward democratic activity for Australians, but for this, they've become a real target.
Thank you. I want to just move on from specific cases and just speak generally about in a de-identified way. And I'm interested in the Iranian diaspora's relationship and engagement with our intelligence and law enforcement agencies and their views about the effectiveness of those engagements. We know that ASIO has disrupted at least one foreign interference plot, and to be fair to the agencies, it's often very difficult for them to publicly talk about it. It's often the case that they are disrupting much more activity but can't disclose it publicly. But setting that aside, what is the engagement of the community with the agencies and what feedback do they have?
Okay, I think it's rather complicated, Chair, but obviously ASIO has been trying to monitor these people for a long time. In fact, back in 2003, ASIO and the Federal Police raided everybody that they could identify in Australia connected to PMOI, for instance, as if they were terrorists, and that was the sort of reason for the raids. Nothing, of course, emerged from that.
No.
But naturally it alarmed that community and made them very anxious, I would say. So from 2003 right up till now, ASIO people from time to time have been going to visit and ask questions to these people, and they oscillate between I don't want to talk to ASIO or I'll talk a lot to ASIO, and I think there's a lot of anxiety about what's really going on here. Is it safe? Is it dangerous? And so on. And in this current time, with the much higher level of public awareness, and I think the Australian government being more forthright about Iran, I think that the community are more willing to talk to ASIO. My advice has been, I also get freaked out by ASIO, so I always say, just go and talk to the Federal Police. You're more likely to have a way to deal with whatever flows from that than perhaps with ASIO. But they don't necessarily take my advice. The different people do different things. But I think in this last couple of years especially, I myself have tried to give information to the Federal Police, the New South Wales Police, about a sense of danger from Iranian agents operating in Australia. And it's been difficult to feel like we made an impact, I guess now it's better, but say back in 2018 there was actually an attempted bombing of Iranians in Paris, which was a very dangerous situation. And ASIO did immediately try to question people when they came back to Australia from Paris, but their line of questioning was more like to find out more about their organisation rather than what happened and why would these people be threatening to kill them with a bomb. So it's not been very straightforward at the ASIO side. With the police, we were given evidence to the Parliament. The parliamentary people have said immediately, please go to the Federal Police or ASIO with this information, so we did that. And it was really a bit of a merry-go-round that ring the Federal Police, they say go to the New South Wales Police. Ring the New South Wales Police, they say go to the Federal Police. So eventually I had to go in person to the Federal Police during the pandemic, and because no one would really talk on the phone. But I think it was a reasonable exchange. I was interrogated or questioned and able to convey all the information I wanted to. It was taken seriously, and then they said, of course you might never hear from us again, but we will deal with this in some way. So I was encouraged by that. And now I see that the government, the Parliament is very engaged, and I'm more confident that our agencies are sort of getting a clearer view of what's going on and more willing to take action to protect people here than they might have been before.
Yeah, thank you. I'll hand the call to Deputy Chair Senator Walsh, but I should also put on the record from my point of view as the former chair of the Intelligence Committee overseeing these agencies, they're certainly not above criticism and scrutiny, and I think that's a healthy part of our democratic process. But it's certainly my impression that both the AFP and ASIO are very sincere about these issues, that they're very hungry for information from diaspora communities, the Iranian diaspora community among them and all others, and they do really want and are helped by reports of attempted or alleged foreign interference or intimidation, because if it's not reported to them, they can't always take action on it.
I agree with that, yeah.
Thank you. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr Murphy. I just wanted to go back to the example that you gave us in relation to Ms Nosra Hussaini.
Yeah.
This is an example of a person in Australia who's grown up in Australia, who's Australian of Iranian descent, who's spoken out about the situation in Iran and the women's movement, and then there's been a situation with family members back home. This is quite a sort of direct form of foreign interference, isn't it? Because
Correct.
Effectively the activity in Iran is designed to limit the behaviour on home soil of an Australian person.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the basics of our democratic society, include freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and this family in Melbourne have been told to stop talking, stop attending certain meetings, and stop expressing certain views, because it's really a blatant attack on our basic rights by a foreign government.
And so, policy solutions which we're, very engaged in trying to work through on this committee, and as you said, in the Parliament more broadly, seem quite challenging in that particular example. What do you see as the most important policy solutions for us to pursue here in relation to that?
I think identifying, if possible, the actual agencies or individuals in Iran who are making these communications, their crimes. And so trying to identify and trying to either block the threats or even take some further action against those individuals, that's the primary thing to do, I think. And in Nosrat's case, I really don't know what happened in that detail. And it's probably fair enough for me to say there's not a lot of police resources available to do that sort of thing. Some, but not in this situation, there would be nothing like enough at the moment.
And so, there's an element of the response and the strategy that it would seem has to be about sort of foreign policy, as well as a range of domestic mechanisms, which is, probably what we've been more focused on today. But it doesn't seem like there's sort of one solution that can be pointed to for this particular example and this challenge. How do you view, in your opening statement, you talked about the use of social media in relation to the women's movement. How do you view that? How have people been able to use social media to advance that cause?
For the last few years, there's been, through this National Council of Resistance of Iran and the organisations that are its members, they've urged people and assisted people to form they call them resistance units in Iran. So this is a more coherent structure at a local level in different cities in Iran. But as we described, the difficulty of using the internet safely, there was a need for training in the use of virtual private networks, acquiring SIM cards which can then be removed and not traced any further, and routines and practices to be able to hide things from raids by security forces on people's houses. Because in Iran it's been such a long history of struggle. As the technology changed, the regime always was almost in front. So, in the old days, people would, instead of using their home phone, they would use a telephone box. And it wasn't very long before we'd go to the telephone box and make the call, they would be raided at the telephone box. And then the mobile phone came along, and then their cell phones were traced so quickly. So various software consultancies sell this surveillance equipment. And so when the internet was used and we had like WhatsApp, well, they also were getting trapped with WhatsApp. So everyone's trying to find their way to just keep one step ahead of the surveillance and evade tracking. That's really where we're at the moment for the people inside Iran. So that's been a real job, and I think that the fact that the protest movement has survived the killing of 700 of its activists and the arrest of about 30,000 of its activists, you can imagine the government is just trying to completely decapitate the organising capacity of the people. They've still kept going. So I think that the internet has been really vital for that to happen, but using it in a very, very careful way.
And are the platforms available to be used in Iran across the board? I don't know what the case is in Iran.
Well, I think in my submission there's a bit of data from Deutsche Welle about the Western platforms which are used, but the Iranian government produced mimics of those. So there's apps that are just like WhatsApp or just like Telegram, but they're run in the end by the regime itself. So they're used to track people, so that people can't use them either. But if they do use them, they should use them with a SIM card, which is disposable. They should use a VPN to make it look like for a while they're in some other country. And get off as quickly as they can, not hang around on the internet to be tracked down. That's what's happening.
Right. So, I mean, we've all seen a lot of, really powerful images of the protests in Iran. Is it the case that that video is not just sort of, uploaded and shared from Iran for the reasons that you're describing, and that it tends to be, moved out and posted from other countries?
I believe all of those video clips which I've been watching, they are broadcast out of Iran using this technique I'm describing to you, like a VPN.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So people are broadcasting from Iran, but using, they're posting from Iran, but they're using a VPN which hides their identity
and location.
And then using a different page identity to post that information.
Yes.
Right. So it is a case, I guess, which we haven't had on the committee thus far in our proceedings, of where social media platforms have been useful in, very much advancing a democratic aim in that country.
It's vital. It's actually vital. Yeah. In fact, one of the demands that not hearing so much lately, but because the government in Iran can completely shut down the internet in certain regions or even across the whole country, and therefore you can't get any information out or even talk to each other in that space. People have been looking for satellite-based ways to directly communicate to the global internet without going through the government's hubs and so on. So I think that Elon Musk's network made some equipment available for that, but I think it's on a very small scale. So I think people are just struggling like a guerrilla war with the government of Iran to communicate, but they are succeeding.
In relation, I think just a final question, I think, from me, Chair, in relation to the Iranian diaspora here in Australia, it doesn't seem like, is there a challenge in getting sort of unbiased, well-researched news about what is happening in Iran here in Australia? We've heard from other regimes that it can be difficult. So we've heard about other regimes and diaspora communities where it can be difficult for people to get kind of balanced news about what's happening back home. Can you describe the situation?
I do think it's difficult, but because the movement in Iran is very large, it's happening in every city in the country, at every university and so on. If somebody or several people in each of those locations is sending out images and some text about what's happened today or last week or whatever, it's possible to build up a picture of like a nationwide assessment rolling forward. And I think that is happening. But the mainstream media in the West especially has you know, it keeps its attention on Iran for a while, and then it has to move to somewhere else. It cannot sustain it. And so then you're dealing with the different Iranian organisations doing news services. So like the National Council of Resistance of Iran has a television daily broadcasting on the internet. The monarchist grouping around the Pahlavi family, they also have TV and other media. So then you still have to struggle to understand, you know, like balance out all of that as well. So it's harder when you have to struggle so hard, you know, to get the bits of news and then put it together. Whereas in our society, we have big media units who do it all for us and then package it every day for us. We don't have that for Iran.
And just in that answer, you've said that Twitter may have, you know, provided some tools there to try to assist with getting information out. Is that well known? Are there other examples of that?
It's not so much Twitter. It's some other, you know, company that Musk has got. It's got these geostationary satellites, a lot of them, that can be directly broadcasting. I can't remember the technical names for these things, transponders, which pick up the signals. And so, you know, so long as there's a way, like a little tower, it might just do a sort of radius of 300 metres or something. Everyone in there can use it. That's what I think has happened. So there's probably only about 100 of those being put into the country somehow or other.
I think it's called Starlink, and they're individual terminals that facilitate access in an uncensored way to the internet in authoritarian places. It's certainly been widely used in Ukraine in the context of Russia's attempt to effectively sever Ukraine's connection to the internet and silence the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Murphy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Mr Murphy, very grateful for your attendance before the committee today and the evidence you brought on behalf of the Iranian-Australian community, a perspective which is greatly valued by the committee. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much for taking it on board.